Percy Jackson's 7th grade year has been surprisingly quiet. Not a single monster has set foot on his New York prep school campus. But when an innocent game of dodgeball among Percy and his classmates turns into a death match against an ugly gang of cannibal giants, things get, well, ugly. And the unexpected arrival of his friend Annabeth brings more bad news. The magical borders that protect Camp Half-Blood have been poisoned by a mysterious enemy, and unless a cure is found, the only safe haven for demigods will be destroyed. In this fresh, funny, and wildly popular follow-up to The Lightning Thief, Percy and his friends must journey into the Sea of Monsters to save their camp. But first, Percy will discover a stunning new secret about his family, one that makes him question whether being claimed as Poseidon's son is an honor or simply a cruel joke. Just like with my review for The Lightning Thief, I went about reading and reviewing this book in the style of giving mini anecdotes for each chapter. This isn't a summary review of the entire book, and there definitely will be spoilers. So if you haven't read this book yet, I urge you to do so. Pause the video and then come back to me. Done reading? Okay, let's get on with the book review. Chapter 1. My best friend shops for a wedding dress. The first chapter starts us off with an unusual dream for Percy. If you remember from the first book, Percy dreams a lot, but it was mostly about Kronos, and it was surreal and hard to decipher. This current dream that he's having, on the other hand, reads a bit more literal. It's not a whimsical, complicated metaphor of the real stakes he's dealing with, like in the first book. It's direct to the point, and Percy even describes smelling the scent of a certain monster in the dream he's having. Grover might actually be in real trouble, or is he? Percy eats breakfast with his mom, and they get into this discussion of him not going to Camp Half-Blood just yet, which makes Percy have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions as well. Who's this new character named Tyson? It's his brother, but we'll read more about him in the next few chapters. And who is this unknown silhouette seemingly following him around? It's probably Annabeth, since she has her invisibility cap, remember? I actually don't remember, so I'm excited to find that out. Chapter 2. I play dodgeball with cannibals. I understand now why the first chapter was so quick, because chapter 2 was very, very long, but was quite a fun read. We get to learn more about Tyson in this chapter. He's Percy's only friend, a clumsy giant of a kid, and he can kill off monsters and protect Percy. So the dodgeball bullies in this chapter were mentioned to be Lystragonians, which are basically man-eating giants who came from Lystragon, who is the son of Poseidon. So they're basically Percy's nephews, or adoptive nephews. Greek mythology is weird. Cool dodgeball scene though. And we get a confirmation that the shadow in Percy's window that morning was Annabeth. Girls giving stalker vibes. I don't know what her deal is with Tyson, because she's mentioned to have a distaste towards him at the very end of the chapter. I guess we'll see what that's about later on. Oh, and it's really cute to know that Annabeth and Percy have been staying in touch even outside of Camp Half-Blood over the past year. Percy says that she's annoying sometimes, but that's just him denying his feelings. Anyway, on to the next chapter. Chapter 3. We hail the taxi of eternal torment. This chapter had such a crazy and kinetic energy to it. The whole taxi cab scene alone felt like a roller coaster ride. The back and forth dialogue of the three Grey sisters towards Percy and Annabeth, while Tyson's just there getting motion sickness. It was honestly really insane, and I love that about this chapter. Before all of that, Annabeth was making it clear to us that she didn't like Tyson for some reason. She calls the Lystragonians Canadians. I don't know what that means, but sure. Tyson's not a normal human. Let's just make that clear. I don't know why Percy can't see past the mist to notice that he's been hanging around the Cyclops the whole time he was in school. In fact, this happened a lot in the first book. It takes a while for him to see the real form of things without the effect of the mist. Why is that? I don't know. Maybe it's just a narrative convenience to make the monster reveals have that much more impact when they happen. Who knows? Chapter 4. Tyson Plays with Fire. 4 chapters in, and we're already served a slew of action-packed scenes. Percy fighting Lystragonians in his last day of school, a taxi ride with the Grey Sisters, and now in this chapter, metal bulls made by Hephaestus attacking the borders of Camp Half-Blood. Talk about a great introduction to the second book of this series. Tyson is revealed to be a Cyclops, and this chapter answered my question from the last chapter. See, the mist can also affect demigods, gods. And Percy not looking close enough to Tyson's face blocked him from seeing that his friend only had one eye on his face. The way Annabeth explained Tyson's existence was really interesting. She said that Tyson was one of the offsprings made by the gods with nature spirits, and that similar children like him aren't really that accepted and get thrown away and forgotten all across the world. If you take away the Greek mythology aspect of that whole thing, Tyson is either within the spectrum, the R word, which was used in the second chapter by the school bully, or has Down syndrome. It's crazy how that analogy was able to fit well once Greek mythology was sprinkled in. Like, yep, that explains it, I guess. Chapter 5. I get a new cabin mate. Lots of new characters were introduced in this chapter. Charles Beckendorf, Travis and Connor Stoll, and the new activities director, Tantalus. Chiron was chosen for the blame of getting the camp in danger because Thalia's tree got poisoned. So he's off into the wild amongst his centaur brethren in the meantime to search for a cure. There's this funny moment where Chiron snaps at Tyson for confusing him for a pony. My dear Cyclops, I am a centaur. Funny as hell, man. It's very rare for me to get caught off guard like that while I'm reading something. Tantalus is an interesting new character. I don't know if you've noticed already, but I've forgotten most of the events of this book. And so it's like I'm reading it again for the first time. I don't know if this guy is gonna be a plot twist villain at the end, but I am feeling some kind of doubt towards him. If he's a villain in the end, I wouldn't be surprised. I'd be more surprised if he turned out to be a good guy at this point. Oh, and Tyson is Percy's half-brother. Chapter 6. Demon Pigeons Attack. Percy and Annabeth have their first fight in this chapter. Not a physical fight, more of a lover's quarrel really. Percy's embarrassed about Tyson becoming his half-brother. He states that he feels like he's no longer the hero who saved the camp last year and is now the butt of a joke. I get it, he can't always be at the top because as readers, you'd want to be reading someone you can relate to. So having Tyson around gave him a reset to his street cred among the other campers. Nice touch, Riordan. Selena Beauregard, a child of Aphrodite, is introduced in this chapter in the funniest way possible, but I can't really explain why because it wouldn't be age appropriate for the kind of viewers this video will tend to get. So I'll just keep that funny little detail to myself. I like Beckendorf. He's been mentioned twice so far, and both times are just brief narrations from Percy about Beckendorf being such a cool dude, inventing cool stuff with his cool abilities because he's a Hephaestus kid. I wish there's more of him, but if I remember correctly, Percy dreams about Grover again, and this time we get a clearer understanding of what's happening. The dream is basically real, and Grover was in real danger in some island where a Cyclops named Polyphemus lives. After the dream, the chariot race begins. A bunch of demon pigeons attack the racers, Clarice wins the race, and Percy and Annabeth are blamed for the attack of the Stymphalian birds, as Annabeth called them. These are man-eating birds that have bronze beaks that could maim mortals really badly. I gotta say, we haven't even gotten to the Sea of Monsters yet, but already we're being introduced to a lot of new monsters from Greek mythology. Gotta love that good world building. Chapter 7. I Accept Gifts from a Stranger. This was a nice chapter to read. It's not very often that gods pay you a visit, but Hermes visiting Percy just felt so wholesome and funny because of George and Martha, the two snakes wrapped around his caduceus. He gives him gifts for his coming journey and a little bit of wisdom when it comes to family. Much like Ares and the other gods, Hermes doesn't meddle with the quarrels of his children. He knows that Luke and Percy are on opposite sides right now, but he doesn't try to persuade Percy of seeing reason when it comes to Luke's situation. He just guides him on giving Luke the benefit of the doubt, a second chance, if you will. Tantalus is honestly written really well. I understand how Mr. D is taking a backseat in the narrative this time around, because him and Tantalus sort of give off the same vibe to Percy, and that'd just be too overwhelming to deal with. So I get why Mr. D had to stay in the sidelines for this book. My opinion of Tantalus so far is that he's teetering between being a likable and unlikable character. I don't know what his deal is yet, but I'm pretty sure he's a villain in disguise. Okay, I'm not really sure, but that's what makes it much more interesting to me. Oh, and I just love how the Sea of Monsters is established to be in the Bermuda Triangle. Like, yeah, that sounds about right. I also like how this is basically a retake on Jason's quest to find the Golden Fleece. Percy even mentions the Ray Harryhausen movie. Chapter 8. We board the Princess Andromeda. I don't really get how they weren't able to see the other people on board the Princess Andromeda the first night Percy and his friends got on it. The boat is somewhat cursed, and I don't know the mythological backstory to it. Maybe it'll get explained in a later chapter, but Luke is there for some reason. This is Hermes' gift to Percy, so that part makes sense. I can't wrap my head around the context of this boat. Nothing really sparked much of my interest on this chapter. Percy called some hippocampi, which are basically large seahorses, to help them get to the boat. One thing I do want to note is that it's been like 2 chapters where Tyson's been fiddling with some kind of metalwork project he's been working on. In chapter 6, Beckendorf took an interest on Tyson because he's a Cyclops, and taught him how to use the forge in the Hephaestus cabin. So I guess we'll see in a future chapter what becomes of Tyson's secret little project. Chapter 9. I have the worst family reunion ever. Every new chapter in this book seems to make me more and more overwhelmed with just how much information is being tossed around so fast, like it was common knowledge. Percy and Annabeth get reunited with Luke, and I don't really recognize this Luke at all. He's written very differently that he seems like a different character altogether, but he does sort of feel like himself again once the conversation turns toward a discussion regarding their differing ideologies. Luke is still mad at the gods, no surprise there, but we get a clearer explanation as to what his gripes are with them in the first place. He points out the actions and inactions of Percy's father, Poseidon, putting it in a lens where Poseidon's toying with Percy by claiming Tyson as his son back in Camp Half-Blood. Percy's been feeling the same thing and has been thinking the same thing throughout the story so far. But that's just how a normal person would react to those specific situations. Percy still accepts his new half-brother, regardless of his feelings towards the whole idea of it. It's not that Luke's perspective is wrong, it's just that it also isn't quite right. Plus, he's being brainwashed by Kronos, so we need to treat his every word with a grain of salt. Bear twins named Agrias and Areus, Ethiopian Dracon, Scythian Dracane. The list of monsters just keep getting longer, and I'm starting to lose track of which is which. Luke poisoned Thalia's tree, and there's also this guy named Chris Rodriguez, a random undetermined kid from Cabin 11. Chapter 10. We hitch a ride with dead Confederates. You can't just name a chapter after something that happens very late in the same exact chapter. This has already happened twice. The first was in the 3rd chapter of Book 1, titled Grover Loses His Pants, in which Grover does lose his pants, but at the very end of the chapter. In this one, Percy, Annabeth, and Tyson escape from the Princess Andromeda. They take shelter inside one of the campsites Annabeth stayed in back when Thalia and Luke were protecting her, and Tyson grabs a box of donuts from a monster donut branch in the middle of the forest. They come face to face with a Hydra, a freaking Hydra, dude, and yet the chapter is titled We Hitch a Ride with Dead Confederates. That should have been the title of the next chapter, to be honest. This chapter could have been titled something like We Find a Random Donut Shop in the Forest, or something to that effect. It's not a spoiler to the special event of the chapter. It just mentions the location and not what actually happens in that location. The Hydra not being mentioned in the title makes its reveal in the chapter effective. That I can get by. But man, now I understand why the Heroes of Olympus series was titled after the names of the characters instead, to avoid these exact situations. Chapter 11. Clarice blows up everything. This was a nice action-packed chapter. It wasn't great, but that's just me having a hard time wrapping my head around large, spectacular monsters like Charybdis or Scylla. I'm getting more and more unfamiliar with these new monsters being introduced in the story, and I love learning new things from Greek mythology, but at the pace this book is going, you don't really get a chance to slow down and let the events sink in. You do that, and the next thing you know, Percy and his friends are already facing off another big-named god or monster of some kind. Again, I love that aspect of this book. I even think it's very clever that there's this sort of back-to-back, twice as more difficult quest than the last one. But I just wish we could at least have some time to breathe and relax for a bit and absorb what's happened so far. Percy seeing Clarice fold in her father's presence is an interesting moment to digest in this chapter though. He's seeing that even the toughest girl in the camp can fumble and be insecure with herself towards her dad, who she's probably afraid of disappointing in any capacity. Clarice sort of reminds reminds me of Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender, but without the unevenness of her mental state. Well, that's debatable for now. But yeah, the two of them try their best to earn the pride of their fathers, and bicker with their siblings/cousins, and both are absolute badasses.
Chapter 12. We check in to Cece's spot in the resort.
You know what I said about having moments in a story where you could sit back and relax, take a breather, and let the influx of information settle in your head? This whole chapter is that moment. Percy and Annabeth rendezvous into a sketchy beach resort looking island in the middle of nowhere. To cut things short, this is a front to disguise the latest whereabouts of Circe, the infamous sorceress of Greek mythology. There's a book about her by Madeline Miller, but let's stick to Percy Jackson for now, and maybe revisit that topic in the future. A wink wink. This chapter is so similar to the Lotus Hotel chapter, mixed with the chapter that had Procrustes trying to put Percy and Grover to bed, and not in a good way. It's like such a secluded, standalone feeling chapter that I'm growing to anticipate the next time a chapter like this comes around in other books. It's always fun and interesting to read because it just feels so out of place, but also still very cohesive to the overall story of the book. But if you read it as is, it still really works on its own, like a side quest story or a paralogue of some kind. That's how this chapter felt like to me. I love it and I want more of it. Oh, and Blackbeard's name is Edward Teach. Such a normal sounding name, by the way, and is one of Ares' sons. Makes sense.
Chapter 13. Annabeth tries to swim home.
From the fast-paced, action-packed first half of this book to a slower feeling, steady-paced second half, this is the second chapter so far that I really like reading. It's similar to the previous chapter. Not a lot is going on, there aren't too many new monsters being introduced for you to keep track of, and we get a lot more Pergabeth screen time. I also love that we get to see Annabeth risk her sanity for the price of potentially strengthening it if she succeeds on getting out of the trance caused by the siren's songs. Percy was there to help her get out of it, but it was Annabeth's decision to push through and face a personal dilemma head on, and that makes her a more fleshed out character than she already is. It's revealed that she's also starting to see reason towards Luke's perspective on things. Her fatal flaw is that she has the tendency to think that she could do things better if she was given the chance to make things better. And she mentioned that she's also having some trouble accepting why the gods distance themselves so much from their mortal offspring. Something that she and Percy both share, as well as Luke. Such a great chapter, and we get a cool dream sequence where Percy meets Thalia. She's not name dropped in this chapter, but how she's described by Percy definitely confirms it. What role she plays in all this, I guess we'll find out soon enough.
Chapter 14. We meet the Sheep of Doom.
This chapter makes me want to read the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Odysseus references probably would have made me excited if I knew where it was from, but nevertheless, this chapter is great. Can't say much about it since the stakes of this particular moment are incomplete. Percy and Annabeth are finally on the island where Grover's located, and Clarice is also there. Tyson's nowhere to be found though, which makes Percy sad because he thinks that his half-brother died from the explosion a few chapters earlier. What else can I say about this chapter? I guess when it comes to the final boss of this book, Polyphemus seems like a downgrade from Ares, who is a literal god. Polyphemus is just some dumb cyclops who wants to get married for some reason. When Grover's disguise was broken, he immediately pivoted to wanting Clarice as his bride. Like, what happens after he gets married to her, or to anyone? Seems like something's missing from all this hullabaloo. But then again, I'm reading too much into this. It's a book for kids. Polyphemus is probably just lonely. The sheep are his only true companions.
Chapter 15. Nobody gets the fleece.
When Polyphemus got defeated so easily in this chapter, I thought, what the hell? Then came the last paragraph where Polyphemus is still alive. This book is definitely shaping up to be a mixed bag for me. I'm honestly more interested in the other places they went to, the other monsters and characters they encounter, and then getting to see Luke appear in the story. I could care less about Polyphemus, honestly. He's just so boring to me. Like a typical bad guy in a movie that's more built for laughs than thrill or fear. He's not threatening in any shape or form, regardless of him being a Cyclops. But hey, Tyson's back. I knew we wouldn't lose him that easily. I also like that Clarice has a nice amount of character presence in this book too. She was just this typical bully in the first book, but in this one, well, she's still a bully, but we do get to see her set that aside in order to fight alongside Percy and his friends. Although, I know she's just doing it to succeed in her quest. It is technically still her quest, since Percy and Annabeth did also just technically break the rules because Hermes persuaded them to.
Chapter 16, I Go Down with the Ship.
Great action-packed chapter right here. Percy and Tyson working together to beat Polyphemus, even though he's still alive in the end, and they barely managed to escape him. Clarice shouldn't have made the battle more difficult. Being the daughter of Ares, she should have known better than to shout and reveal their whereabouts to the enemy. It's just not a good battle strategy. But then again, being the daughter of Ares, it also makes sense for her to aggravate any conflict that she's in.
Chapter 17, we get a surprise on Miami Beach.
You know what I'm disliking more and more? Luke's characterization. Not Luke himself, but how he's being handled in this story. Shouldn't he be a little bit smarter than this? He was able to steal the Master Vault and the Helm of Darkness without anybody noticing, except for Ares, of course. In previous chapters, it's written as though he's always 2 steps ahead, knowing every single detail happening in Percy's journey because he's being fed the information by some of his spies in Camp Half-Blood. And he's serving Kronos, who also feeds him with some kind of power to help him in his crusade to reviving him. And not to mention the dozens of monsters and the other demigods already on his side. Shouldn't Luke feel a little bit more like a difficult challenge for Percy? In this chapter, Luke does appear, but his dialogue right out the gate just sounds very wrong to me. Hey cuz, I get that they're all young and should be talking like this naturally, but in book 1, Luke was written as a serious character. Whenever he talked, it was like there was something else he was thinking of, something else that was troubling him. Here, he just feels like caricature. This just doesn't feel like the Luke that was set up in the first book. His characterization is all wrong just by the way he speaks, and his inability to see the flaws in his plans are just so infuriating to read. What happens is that it feels like Percy is becoming a Mary Sue type character, winning almost every fight he's faced with ease and simplicity. He shouldn't feel this way given that he's the main character of this series. Anyway, that's my mini review of this chapter.
Chapter 18, the Party Ponies Invade.
Deus Ex Machina. If you know what that means, then you understand what just happened in this chapter. Percy faces off Luke in what seems like the final battle of this particular book. We see him struggling, which is good. We need to see Percy struggle to fight Luke one-on-one. That's what makes Luke a good antagonist. Or maybe that would have made Luke a good antagonist, if not for the sudden appearance of the centaurs to save the day and put their fight at a standstill. The centaurs are cool, don't get me wrong. I like the vast difference of Chiron's demeanor from his cousins and all that. But why did they have to interfere with what could have been a great end to this book? We could have seen Percy fail hard just once in his adventures. He'd try his very best, but still fail in the end. That would have been a great outcome to his fight with Luke. Instead, the centaurs save the day, and Luke gets beaten by a glove-pointed arrow. That's so comically insane to do to your antagonist. Are you trying to make him a threat, or are you trying to make him the butt end of a joke? Make up your mind. This is infuriating to me. I want to like this story so much, but Rick Riordan just keeps on making it difficult. The only good part in this is the absolute killer lore drop Chiron told Percy at the end, saying that his father is the Titan Kronos. Oh, and the unnamed black horse being kept by the Bearman monsters is gonna play a bigger role in the future. Other than that, I hate what just happened in this final battle.
Chapter 19, the chariot race ends with a bang.
Okay, this chapter makes me take it all back. I really love this chapter. Percy's back in camp, everything's back to normal, and this is the slice of life moments we come back to from these books. The metalwork project Tyson was working on during the whole journey was a wristwatch that turned into a shield. It's his nice little gift to Percy, and I couldn't be happier. Hermes makes another brief appearance, which is great. I love that he explains the complicated dynamic every god has with their demigod children, how family problems are always difficult, even more so that there's Greek mythology involved. It's a great deconstruction of the very problems real families tend to go through in well, real life. The best example would be the overseas workers who leave their family in order to work a difficult job in order to raise their family. The side effects that situation brings to their relationship to their spouses and children. The feeling of abandonment the children feel when they're so far away from their parents. All they want at the end of the day is to feel like they're loved. And that goes for both sides, actually. Going back to the world of this story, demigods tend to feel like the gods have abandoned them because of their lack of presence. But in reality, the gods are always there when they need them the most. They answer their prayers, give them guidance in their quests, and only really ask that their children put their faith in them. Sometimes we forget that parents do a lot of work just to keep their children alive and well. But that usually works if they go out into the world in order to work the toughest jobs they could find. That's the underlying message of these books. Oh, and Annabeth kissed Percy on the cheek in this chapter.
Chapter 20. The Fleece Works Its Magic Too Well.
The final chapter. Thalia returns from the dead by the magic of the Golden Fleece. The prophecy becomes a little bit more complicated than it already is. The Great Big Prophecy was already hinted at in the first book, and was also mentioned several times in this second book. The actual lines of the prophecy hasn't been mentioned yet, though. But from the information that's been told, it involves a child of one of the big three, meaning Zeus, Hades, or Poseidon, and it'll happen on their 16th birthday. Since Thalia was presumed dead... No, wait. She actually did die. The fleece just brought her back. But since Thalia was dead, Chiron and Annabeth thought that Percy was the one being mentioned in the prophecy. He is a son of Poseidon, and that qualifies him as being a child of one of the big three. But with the re-emergence of Thalia, the daughter of Zeus, we now have two potential prophets. Wait, are they the prophet? Or are they the prophecy? Probably the latter. Percy Jackson and the Sea of Monsters was a mixed bag for me on this reread of mine. It had a lot of good stuff going for it, but then it ends up doing bad on the important parts of the story, which is kind of weird. If the first book's focus was to reintroduce us to the Greek gods and monsters that most people already have prior knowledge on, as a way to ease our way into this mystical world, the second book's job, and I guess this'll go for the next books as well, is to introduce and expose us to more obscure names in the pantheon of Greek mythology. I didn't know what Lystragonians were, or Stymphalian birds, or even Scythian Dracanae. These are foreign names to me in terms of Greek mythology. Charybdis and Scylla? Never heard of them. Polyphemus, Tantalus, never heard of them. Although maybe if I had read the Iliad and the Odyssey prior to reading the Sea of Monsters, I would have been familiar with them. But then again, this is supposedly a book that's meant for kids to read and to introduce them to the world of Greek mythology. So given that situation, it would be very rare for a kid to have read the Odyssey first before reading this book. What was the point I was trying to make here? I guess I'm just saying that I enjoyed learning about new monsters in this second book, although it was overwhelming at times, more so than the first book, because of how fast-paced this book was, given its much shorter length. This is only 20 chapters. The Lightning Thief had 22 chapters. Of course, it'll feel like a quick read. It's just that for the scope of what was being fed to us, I wish it could have been longer. But moving forward from that, there were some chapters here that I really loved reading, like the time Percy and Annabeth passed by the Sirens, their encounter with the Hydra, and them visiting Circe's beach resort and encountering Blackbeard, which immediately lead to Percy stealing Queen Anne's revenge. Can we talk a little bit about the new powers Percy got in this book? He now has nautical awareness, which grants him the power to know his location when he's in the ocean, and he's got the power to command ships to move at his will. He knows the different parts of a ship as though he's sailed a million times before. And what else? He's got 3 seahorse friends on his side now. To me, it didn't really feel like he was being given too much of an advantage. And that's because of the rules that were established in the first book. He's the son of Poseidon, so these new powers are kinda natural for him to discover. And being the son of one of the big three, Percy unintentionally having the edge on his opponents makes sense. It's literally the foundation of his character. He has to be OP sometimes. But since he's very much always a fish out of water in every new scenario he's in, he doesn't always know how to handle these situations and makes a lot of mistakes along the way. And that's what evens it all out. He can be a Mary Sue sometimes, but that gets disrupted by the fact that he fumbles a lot in his action choices. But with every mistake he makes, there's potential for him to learn something new. The bad parts of this book is with how Luke's character is written. I've gone into detail about it already in the specific chapters where he's involved. But in a nutshell, Luke's very much a caricature of how well he was written in the first book. From being a formidable, threatening antagonist where we don't exactly have a clue what his whole deal is, to a fumbling idiot of a side antagonist who I wish we didn't know more about what his whole deal was. In the Sea of Monsters, he just comes off as a stupid, blindly following loyal little prick to a corrupt leader who wants to destroy the world in order to rule what's left of it. Luke is supposed to be cunning, thinks for himself because he has original thoughts running through his head most of the time, and should be menacing to Percy and his friends. Here, he's just a jerk getting in the way. I hate it so much. I hate it so much. I can just hope that he'll be written better in the next 3 books. Oops. All in all, Percy Jackson and the Sea of Monsters was a mixed bag. Wait, did I say that already? If you got to the end of this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. If you agree or disagree with me with the things I talked about in this book, let me know in the comments. I probably missed out on talking about a few things along the way, but I feel like this has already been a longer video than it should have. So maybe I'll revisit this book in the future to see what's salvageable in it. You could either hit the bell to get notified for when another video comes out, or hit the join button to become a member and gain early access to future videos and or members only content. This is Elmo's Universe, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.